The medical examiner took the stand in the Letitia Stout trial. Y'all, it was worse than we ever imagined. It's what nightmares are made out of, and we're going to talk about some of it today in this video. Hello Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. That's the sofa back there with our mascot, Mr. Roscoe P. Coltrane. He is blended into the sofa. He is napping, and my name is Paul. Now, like I said in the intro, we're going to be discussing a few of what I consider the highlights of the testimony from the medical examiner. Y'all, trigger warning, okay? This is not for the faint of heart. Now, we are not going to get all up in it, as I say, right? We're just going to talk about really some of the stuff that I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this type thing. But we're not going to get into like the nitty gritty, but still, nonetheless, this could be a video not for everybody. So if this is going to be triggering to you, skip out on this one, okay? So that being said, the way that we'll do this if you're new to the channel is typically what I do is I'll post clips up of the testimony, and we'll use those as talking points, and I'll offer commentary, and then at the end a few overall thoughts. Now, as I always like to say, I am not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any of that fancy stuff. I'm just a guy with a sofa and some opinions on true crime. They're just that, they're my opinions. I always encourage people to drop their own opinions in the comment section, because that's what we're here for. That's what the Sofa Squad is here for. I love hearing what other people think about the cases and the stuff that we talk about. So that being said, let's go ahead and watch the first clip.
There were some drugs, or there was a drug that was present.
Okay, so let's talk first. Acetaminophen, a typical over-the-counter medication, was that found in Gannon?
Yes.
Would that be anything unusual that a child would have potentially residual acetaminophen at the time of autopsy?
If maybe the patient the decedent at that time was having a fever or pain, they would give them acetaminophen or Tylenol.
Would that be common, though, in an 11-year-old to find that in a body potentially?
No, you don't always see that.
Okay. What other things did you find in Gannon's bodily tissues?
Okay, so we're starting there with what could be considered something maybe basic, right? You know, Tylenol essentially, right? Or aspirin, whatever it is. So this part right here, I was like, okay, now remember, Letitia had every single excuse in the book that she gave out to people with Gannon. This was wrong with him. That was wrong with him. This is going wrong. Bah, 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 bah. So, you know, when they started going down this whole road, I was like, okay, you know, this might not be super common, but this is something that is not out of the realm. However, that is where not out of the realm begins and ends.
He also had hydrocodone in the liver tissue.
All right, so let's talk about hydrocodone. What is hydrocodone?
Hydrocodone is a narcotic analgesic. It's a drug used for pain, and that is also found in cough medications because it's supposed to suppress your cough.
Is hydrocodone a controlled substance?
Yes, you need a prescription for that.
So I can't just go to Walgreens without a prescription and buy hydrocodone?
Yes.
Is it indicated as highly addictive?
Yes, you can be dependent on it.
Okay, so there we go, down the slope. Now, if any of you have ever taken hydrocodone, specifically if I'm thinking of the correct thing, I've taken it for dental stuff, like after the fact. This is definitely something that I'm like, yeah, if this is correct, that I'm thinking of the right stuff, completely should not be in this little boy's system, right? This is like completely out of it. So this begins the sinister, you know, mental imagery, downward spiral of thoughts of what did she do to this boy, right? The things that poor little Gannon went through, and this absolute just outrageous, I don't even know, brutality that she inflicted on him. So to me, of course, I interpret this as she drugged him, obviously, right? I do not think she was giving him things to help him with a cough. I do not think she was giving him things to help him with pain. I think that this was her trying to, knock him out or maybe overdose him. I mean, who knows? Because as we will see from the evidence that the medical examiner is presenting, this is one thing I want us to look through the lens of when we're watching this, is this is the theme: overkill, overkill, overkill.
What are the effects of hydrocodone on a human?
Depending on the dosage, you can initially become drowsy, lightheaded, dizziness. And if you take a higher dose, it could lead to respiratory depression, or you'll have problems breathing. You'll have lethargy, coma, and eventually death.
See, that's what I'm talking about right there. And again, if you've ever taken this before, then you'll know, especially like I can remember taking it for the dental stuff, like I said, and I just remember that feeling of like just that extreme, like, and now this is having teeth, like extreme dental work done, right? So I can't fathom the feeling of that with like no reason to take it, like somebody slipped it to you kind of a thing, right? God only knows what and how much she gave the poor boy, right? I mean, this is an 11-year-old boy, right? With somebody who clearly did not have his best interest at heart. So the fact that she did this also plays into this dynamic here. For someone who is now trying to say, I had a moment, I was not sane when I did this, whoopsie daisy kind of a thing. The evidence, not only with what the medical examiner is presenting, and we're going to talk about the other sketchy evidence in a different video because I wanted to focus on this, but I mean, we're talking cover up, we're talking pre-planning, we're talking about cohesive thinking.
Was it unusual, in your opinion, to find hydrocodone in a child of 11 years old, like we did here in Gannon's death?
Yes, I found it unusual.
Yeah, you can say that again, sister. I don't even have to have a doctoral degree to tell you that, right? And especially in this context, it'd be one thing if it was like, there was all this evidence. He had had surgery. He had this. He had that. He just had all these teeth extracted, whatever. No. This is a healthy 11-year-old boy, okay? It's completely abnormal.
Is that because of all of those issues you just described?
Yes, and if it was for a cough, you would give something that didn't have the, narcotic analgesic in it.
Typically, people would not.
Yes, that wouldn't be the first line of choice.
Okay.
Now, also what comes to my mind watching this clip, if you've been following the trial or if you haven't, there was one clip in the phone calls that she made with Al, that is her former husband, Gannon's father, where she was basically trying to tell Al making a reasoning for one of her actions, and she was like, I was just trying to be a good parent. I can't really mimic her voice, but she's like, I was just trying to be a good parent, look out for him, when she was clearly lying, right? And so I think it's just ironic that then the evidence shows where the medical examiner's like, yeah, if a kid has a cough or something, you don't just all of a sudden go with hydrocodone, right? It's just like, this is absolutely not, But someone like Letitia, even if it didn't result in what happened to Gannon, I could see her being the type that would just be her go-to. 0 to 100.
Were you able to tell the blunt head trauma injuries, the three on the top of the head you were discussing? Can you tell the jury if those were post-mortem or pre-mortem?
They were pre-mortem.
Pre-mortem.
Now, one reason I wanted to put that specific clip up is because in a minute, the defense is going to ask something about those specific head injuries. So I just wanted to have that up, but also to be able to acknowledge what Gannon went through in his last moments of life, because it's nothing that anybody should ever have to go through, especially a young boy with his whole life ahead of him. It literally gives me goosebumps as I'm talking right now and sends shivers down my spine to think that another human, and I'm using that word lightly when referencing Letitia, could do this to someone else, someone in her charge, someone who she allegedly loved, that she called our child. And so just for be forewarned, we're getting ready to get into this kind of information. And again, the lens that we're looking at this through is overkill, because I think it speaks to something higher. And again, I ain't no shrink or anything like that, right? But this is just, my opinion here. I think it speaks to something higher, this internalized maybe hatred or something that she had towards him, because it's just like, how do you go? It seems so personal. Each of these methods was enough to take him out, right? What is the reasoning for all of it? It was so personal. Why does she dislike this boy to this degree?
That you noted in your report and during the autopsy, they would indicate that this was a violent death.
Yes.
Okay. Also, it looked like a lot of the injuries, the blunt force injuries, the sharp force injuries, it looks like it was just a random act, whereas there's no pattern to it. You have injuries to the head, you have injuries to the body. Some are deep, some are shallow. It indicates that this was a random attack, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There was no pattern to it.
Yes.
Now that right there, it literally, in all honesty, just creates this imagery of her just slashing and flashing him with a knife, right? This erratic, crazy, all over the place kind of a thing. And that's what I'm just like, oh my God. And you think of the chain of events, right? Like, okay, was he drugged? Was he drowsy? Trying to fight for his life, and all this was going on. But again, look at what all he had gone through. It was like this overkill, right? Like each of these methods, it's like, what for? Like, why? Why did you have to do each of the, well, any of them really, right? But then, of course, on top of one another, I mean, what was going through her mind? I mean, I probably hope that I would never understand that, right? And be like, oh, okay, it makes sense, because then I would be worried about myself. You know what I'm saying?
Would the blood force injuries, were they fatal by themselves?
Yes, they could be.
Okay. And you say the gunshot was fatal in and of itself as well?
Yes.
Okay. Did the bullet from the gunshot, I can't remember what you said, did it enter into the cranial vault?
It did not.
It did not. Okay. And the mechanism for death with the gunshot, it was that it severed the spinal cord or some vertebrae?
Yes.
Okay. And what would have been the mechanism for death with the blood force injuries? Would that have been bleeding or hemorrhaging in the brain? What would that have been?
Yes, there was hemorrhage in the brain.
And one thing that gets me too is looking at her over there in the corner, all just pressed up against the wall, away from everybody, which, I mean, I probably would be too, right? Just disinterested, just kind of going through the motions, listening to her attorney, whatever. I mean, it's just so bizarre. And then I'm just imagining the family being in the courtroom and listening to this, because like that statements that he just made and walked through all those injuries, I mean, I'm just like, we don't even know, I personally don't know Gannon or the family, right? But I just think of the imagery that it could, brings up in my own head. So I can't imagine it being like one of my family members or someone that you know personally that you can put a voice to, and mannerisms and memories and feelings. And then to think that this person sitting over here did those things, I cannot imagine. I mean, again, it gives me goosebumps. So, but this is what I'm talking about with looking through the lens of the overkill, and I just sit here and, I go back to my thoughts of the hatred towards Landon, and then in turn, probably the hatred toward Al, this bitterness towards him of maybe life didn't turn out the way, Letitia wanted it, because I do feel like she always wanted the attention to be on her. And then maybe in the very beginning, things were somewhat normal between her and Al. It was like a new thing. The attention was on her, whatever. Then other stuff comes into play, just, how life goes, right? And so maybe she was bitter, and Gannon just represented this, and it just happened to be him that day that whatever he did, which it could have been anything, he breathed wrong, right? I mean, that's all it takes for these people like Letitia to go off and victimize and take lives.
Could any of the injuries noted have happened? There's evidence that there was a suitcase that he was in. He was, the suitcase was thrown off an overpass of a highway, near Pensacola. Is there any way that some of the injuries could have been caused by the impact of the suitcase hitting the ground?
Like which injuries?
The blunt force trauma injuries,
No, they were on the top of the
the
head.
top of the head.
No.
Okay.
Now, at times during this, I question with her defense attorney, mind you, he ain't got much to work with, right? So this is one of those times where I'm like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have asked that question, right? It just, solidifies the horror of it. Like, is there any chance that these injuries could have happened when she threw the suitcase over the bridge? No, 100% did it when he was alive. I'm just like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have asked that. He did create a little, a couple of little things with, well, do we know something about the hydrocodone or whatever? But nonetheless, it's still just super cringe. And again, when this evidence is coming forth and whatnot, I just feel like in certain situations like this, the defense team, they can only work with what they have, and we already know the evidence presents itself that she's a difficult client, right? Look at what she's put everyone through, her own team and whatnot. So I have no doubt that she's done the same with these guys representing her now. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you watch the testimony with the former neighbor up there, I mean, her defense team had to be looking at her like, girl, for real? Like, these are the conversations you're having with a stranger over this? Let alone the phone calls to the fake polygraph site. I mean, I would have... The part where her attorney walked out in the opening statements doing all dramatics, that's when I would have pulled that card and been like, I'm out, going to this bar, me. Okay, I can't see nothing to this anymore, y'all. We are done.
Were any of the sharp force injuries, were any of them in and of themselves fatal?
Because of the decomposition, I couldn't really tell. I mean, when I looked at the lungs, because I was thinking it would penetrate the lungs, I didn't see any injuries, but because there was decomposition, it was hard to see. So I couldn't really tell with the injuries that went into the chest cavity.
So I guess all you can say is it's possible. Is it possible that some or one or more of these sharp force injuries were fatal?
Yes, it could be fatal if left unattended.
Okay.
Again, I know that he has to go through this and kind of like start picking these out and whatnot, but it's almost like he's reiterating the horror of it. But again, I think part of it too is like, because remember, he's going for the insanity thing. So part of me wonders if it was almost like this, let's try and just accentuate how over the top it was, because that will play into, see, the only answer is she's cray-cray.
And this is the right hand, the back of the right hand. And you can see here that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 wounds here. And you can see like the edges are clean cut caused by a sharp object.
And we're looking at these in conjunction with the last photo of the arm and then this one here with hands. When we're talking about cuts to the hands in the forearm areas of Gannon Stauch, how would you characterize those types of wounds?
They're consistent with defensive wounds, trying to protect yourself.
I wanted to end with this clip because against all odds, Gannon fought back against this monster, against his stepmother. And this was so chilling to me because after hearing all this evidence of the horrendous things that she did, to know that he fought back to the very end, right? And also it's very telling when in this clip right here, she's looking down, her hair is pulled over her face. I would like to say hung in shame, but I'm not sure if that's a capable feeling for her at this point, right? But one thing that I always say that, my other videos, so it might not be news or whatever, but one thing that attracts me and interests me to true crime is, psychology, learning about the victims' lives, what was, what could have been, and the psychology of what makes people do the things that they do. And so in things like this where, you hear about the utter tragedy and then you learn, this 11-year-old boy fighting back, trying to fend her off, that kind of fortitude, it's very admirable and it speaks to the type person that Gannon was. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. And it just goes to show again the tragedy of this monster who took him away from the earth and his family all too soon. Now, if you are still watching, drop blue hearts in the comment section for Gannon, for his family, and for all the victims that we talk about here in the channel. I do appreciate it. And until we sit here and gather back around my little fan that's not going because I want to preserve the audio, I'll see y'all soon.